Hello, in this video we're going to take a look at closures in Rust, or at least what I understand of closures so far. And as far as I can see, closures are the same thing that in other programming languages are referred to as lambda expressions. They're basically anonymous functions. So let's create a simple closure here. I'll create a variable, let's call it maybe show or something, so that we can store a reference to the closure. And I'm going to set that equal to a closure. So to create a closure, I put in two vertical pipes followed by some code in braces or just an expression. So here I could have print line and let's have hello. And at the end there I think I do need to put in a semicolon, because although the closure in this case without the braces will end in an expression, we do need a semicolon at the end of the line as a whole. Actually, let's call this greet, and then I should be able to call this closure via the variable that I've assigned it to. So I'm going to try this. Here we can say it says hello. I'm going to run cargo format just in case I've done anything wrong here. So these vertical pipes provide a space where we can pass variables to the closure. So they provide a space for parameters. Let's create a closure that adds two values together. So let add equal, and in the vertical pipes I'm going to write a comma b, and then for the expression that terminates the closure we'll just have a plus b. So then I can call it, let's say let results equal add and maybe 5 and 2, and then I'll print the result of doing this. So I'm going to try to run this. Let's have a look, and we can see we get 7. You can actually explicitly specify the types of the parameters and a return value with the closure if you want to. So let's just copy all of this and do it all again. Maybe with different numbers, just for a change we'll have 7 and 9. And now let's actually specify the type. So we'll have an i32 for A, an i32 for B, and it can also return an i32. And now I believe I'm going to have to put in the braces. So if I try to run this, I get errors, and I need to put in braces here. So now you can see more clearly really that a plus b is the expression that forms the return value of the closure. Let's try this. And you can see it works just fine. We've got 16 coming out down there. What's the actual type of this add variable? Let's copy that yet again and paste it down here. So the type of this variable would actually be a function which accepts, we can say an i32, pair of those, and returns an i32. And if I run that, hopefully this should work as well. Let's put 1 maybe and 4 in there. So that should give us 5. Clear the screen here, and if I run this, we get 5. So this is how we define the type of a variable that has a function type in Rust, apparently. Now if you don't specify explicit types when you define the closure, they are inferred the first time you call it. So yet again I'll copy that first example or second example, and this time I won't specify any types here, no parameter types or return type. I'm just calling it here, and what I want to show you is that if I then try to call this again, let's maybe copy this and put it down here, and this time I supply maybe a float for the first parameter, this is going to give me an error. Let's try it. So I run this, and you can see it says expected integer found floating point number. So it actually inferred these to be integer types i32 when we did this, and that's why I can't later do this. Whereas if we reverse these, if I put 5.1 here and I put 5 down here, let's try that. So now the error is expected floating point number found integer. I've also got some other separate problem here. But if I make both of these floats, I don't think we'll have any problem other than down here. So let's try it. So yeah, the error occurs when we try to use a closure that we passed floating point numbers to, except we pass integers to it. So if I get rid of this, I just comment it out and I run it again. So there's no problem adding two floats together, of course, and you can see it works perfectly well, and we've got 7.3. Closures can also access local variables. I think that's why they're called closures, and that word is used in other languages, even if lambda expressions is preferred in other languages for things like this usually. It's because they kind of enclose a scope and can access the variables within it. So let's have, for example, a vec. So let values equal vec exclamation mark square brackets 1, 2 and 3, and then we can define a closure that accesses those values. So I could have something like let show equal pair of vertical pipes, because I'm not planning to pass this vector to the closure, I'm planning to access it from the enclosing scope. And I can just do something like print ln and double quotes, and in curly brackets I'm going to put values colon question mark, which I think ought to print this out. And then of course we have to call it, because all we've done is define a function that could print it, but now I'm actually going to call that function. And if I run this, let's try it, you can see that it can access that vector from the enclosing scope. So in this case it's going to do a immutable borrow. However, we can also use closures that do mutable borrows. So I'm going to copy all that, and this time I'm going to make the vector mutable, and instead of just printing the values here, let's take that out from there and maybe paste it down here, and I'm going to do values.push 4, so adding a value on now. And I think I'll have to add mute for the closure variable definition as well. So if I actually try to compile that now, you can see it gives me an error here, and it suggests that I put mute on the variable that refers to the closure. So let's do that, let's put mute here, and then when we try this, we can see that it has successfully done a mutable borrow, because it's been able to add 4 to that vector. So what is the actual point of closures? Well, I don't really know, because I'm relatively new to Rust, but in practice, actually I do know, I'm exaggerating. In every other language, the equivalent of a closure is most often used, I would say, just so you can pass a function to another function. So for example, if you have some function of a list, or a vector, I guess it would be, that filters the vector, you might want to pass a closure to that function that specifies how to filter the vector. So most often, I would think in Rust also, you would be using closures to pass them to other functions. We've actually seen several examples of that already in these videos. So let's see how that whole thing would work. And we've now got all the different bits that we would actually need to do that. So I'll create a function and I'll call it run_op. And let's say that the first parameter of this function is going to be called op. Actually, I'll put braces in here. And what's the type of op? It's going to be itself a function that accepts 2 parameters of type i32 and returns a parameter of type i32. Then let's also have a parameter of type i32 called a and one called b. So now this is actually going to be a function, so we can call it and we can pass it a and b, because it's a function that accepts 2 i32s. And let's get the result from that. So I'll say, actually I won't, I'll just make this an expression, so it's the return value of runOp. And then I've got to say here that runOp returns i32 as well. So let's take a look at running this function by passing a closure and 2 integers to it. So I could say let result equal run_op, and the first argument is a closure, so let's have pair of pipes there, and the parameters that the closure is going to accept, I'll call those a and b again, and let's say it can do, let's multiply them together this time, and then I'll pass in 5 and 4, and then we'll print finally the result here. So let's print out result, and we expect to see 20. So I'm going to try that, and I run it, and I've got a load of errors. What have I done? Oh yeah, I made a mistake here, which is that we don't have an arrow there. That's for specifying return values. So the closure just looks like that. Try again. Yep, and now it works. We've got 20 coming out down there. So this is a more typical use of a closure, where we're passing it to a function to do kind of functional style programming. Okay, let's take a look at what we've got for this particular video. In the documentation there is more stuff on closures having to do with what do you call them, parameter type, generic types, yeah, generics I think. So there's some stuff having to do with those, which I haven't looked at yet, but we'll maybe cover that next time. That's the code we've got for today. I hope that was useful. Until next time, happy coding.